Good morning, good evening, good night, depending on which part of the world you are. Welcome to a new ISA webinar. I'm very sorry that last week we could not broadcast it. We have a problem with the microphone. That's why we are coming back on this great topic this week, that is climate change and the critical role of education. Our speaker today is Peter Milne. He is the founder, director of Target for Green and has had over 25 years experience as a teacher, environment coordinator, workshop leader, and educational consultant, working with schools around the world on global citizenship, climate change, and sustainability education. That is why we think that is an honor for us here in ISA to count with Peter, and we will answer the questions that you put on the YouTube chat. This webinar is, of course, in English. We are programming for next ISA webinars, student webinars, and also teacher webinars in the near future, in preparation for our celebration of next year in 2021, that we are going to be 70 years old as an association. So I do not want to keep you from our very important and extremely valued speaker, Peter Milne. So Peter, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Edgardo, and thank you to ISA for giving me this platform to talk about the critical role that education plays in climate change. The plan is for the next few minutes to go through some slides to sort of give you ideas and hopefully motivate you to want to do more within your own sort of settings within schools, to do more on climate change generally, but also to give you practical ideas. To give you a little bit of background from where I'm coming from, I was a teacher for over 20 years. I worked in international school systems in Dubai, Malaysia, also in the UK, independent schools and state schools. And I've sort of been, involved in presentations on the other side, sort of being in the audience. And I always feel it's really important to look at things that you can do that is not going to add on to your busy workload, because I know teachers are always really busy, and the last thing you want to know or do is an extra thing on top of everything else. But hopefully this presentation will be very interactive, so feel sort of free to drop some questions in. I will sort of have some slides where you sort of have to have a couple of minutes to think about what that slide is kind of telling you. So I'll try and make it as practical as possible, and hopefully you'll feel motivated and inspired to do more within your schools, and get some ideas that will be helpful for you. Like I said, I was a teacher for over 20 years, and the last school I worked in was actually Raffles World Academy, which was in Dubai, and it was a very significant school because it was one of the first schools that came onto the Eco Schools program and actually achieved Green Flag in 2012. My role within that school was a full-time teacher, but also environment coordinator. And I think that particular role is very, very important within schools. Quite often I find when I work in schools, either in the UK or globally, I find that there's always a teacher or a couple of teachers who are very passionate about the environment, want to do as much as they can, but they're also full-time teachers as well. So it's quite difficult really to sort of get that balance. And I think a particular role within a school, which is identified just like you would have a maths coordinator or an English coordinator, for example, it's really important to have an environmental education or sustainability coordinator. And I think that's something that all schools should look at, having a specific role that you have time to do, and also you're rewarded for that as well. Now, when I decided in 2012 to leave the classroom, it took a bit of a leap of faith, but I felt it was really important because the Eco Schools program is a really sort of good structured program, but I felt that schools generally would sort of benefit from in-school support from experienced teachers like myself. So I set up, when I was living out in Dubai, initially I set up between 2012 and 2015 as a in the sort of freelance environmental education consultant trainer, and I work with over 40 schools in the Emirates, in particular Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Sharjah, and just getting into schools and assessing where they were at, just to raising awareness and understanding, and sort of giving them practical ideas on how they could sort of move forward. I then moved back to the UK in 2015 and set up my company Target for Green. And I've worked with a number of schools across the world, but also organizations, companies such as BR, which is a big waste management company in Sharjah, looking at their CSR programs and developing educational programs for them. And it's been a fascinating journey. One of the things that I'm particularly involved in is the Beyond COP21 Symposium series, which has taken place 13 times in 6 different countries, with a further 6 events happening in 2021. Obviously, pandemic has had a big effect on that, so it's sort of turned part virtual as well, or fully virtual. And it's a way to bring school communities together and organizations and companies that are focused on sustainability. And I think that's important to feel that whatever you do is very much a community effort. I use this image quite a lot. The reason why I use it is just to have a little quick think about whether you think this image is a selfie or not. I'll give you like 10 seconds to decide on whether you think that's a selfie or not. My personal sort of thought is that it's not a selfie, because if we look at the definition of a selfie is very much focused on the person in the picture, and I think this one is very much focused on what's behind this astronaut. And this is what it sounds so obvious, that we live on one planet, but I think unless you can actually zoom up to space and look down on it, you realize just how delicate and fragile this place is if we are doing what we continue to do to this planet. So very much this picture is not a selfie, because I think it's focused on what's behind the glory of this amazing planet and how we need to protect it. I think going on to sort of talk about selfies, I think generally we have become a very self-centered, in the now kind of society where it's all about image, and it's the quick picture, it's what we look like, and it's not so much about what's behind us, what the bigger reality is. This is a fascinating image here, actually. This was taken by a friend of mine in Singapore, and this was actually a bunch of people following the Pokemon Go thing. And it's quite a sad sort of reflection of where we've come, because all these people are there together, but they're actually not engaging with each other at all. They're looking at some kind of unreal sort of thing that doesn't exist in the real world. So is that sort of a reflection of where we've come? Are we really at that point? And this is a very powerful image. And when reality does hit, is it too late? And I think when you're teaching about climate change, it's really important to focus on these kind of issues, like what is happening to the polar bear. The polar bear, the effect that climate change has had on the polar bear, its lifestyle and its feeding habits is massive. It's a species that will likely to be extinct within the next 2 or 3 decades, and that is shocking, because it's a direct result of what we're doing to the climate. And the polar bear doesn't sit alone on that one. It's a sad reflection of what we're doing to many species around the world, and the impact that climate change is having, not just on animals, but on whole societies globally. So it's a good one to start with, as an investigation for children, to look into the lifestyle and feeding habits of polar bears, and just realize just how much they've been impacted by climate change. Now, I work with a lot of schools, and I find that one of the questions I ask when it comes to climate change, getting climate change, is that when I ask them in an assembly situation or in a workshop situation, who's aware of climate change, I do find that a lot of hands do go up. But when I switch on to who understands climate change, a lot of those hands go down. And I think this is the disconnect. We sort of are aware, but we don't really delve too deeply into what climate change is. So really, truly understanding it. But more than just that, it's about how relevant it is to our world, our sort of existence, our sort of life in school, our life outside of school, and also whether we are connected to it and affected by climate change. We can quite often look at images in different parts of the world and say, well, it is terrible, but it's affecting so and so over there or so and so over there. When actually it's affecting all of us. And I think once we realize just how affected we are or can be in the future, I think it's a lot easier to have greater empathy, to really care about what's happening. And I think that's, without the empathy, it's very difficult to be motivated to do something about it. And you can't really jump from sort of awareness to action, because you've got to have everything in between. You've got to know the why and the how. It's not an action. It's an understanding of what to do about it because you really care. And I think that's a really important part of the role that education plays within climate change. So that I'll just kind of, in the next few slides, sort of really talk about the approach I take. So I look at it from looking at causes and consequences, so the why and the how, and then looking at how we are responsible, or what rights we have, and how it's impacting basic human rights. I'll start with causes. Don't know how much you know, but this is important to sort of reflect on what is actually causing climate change. And we see in these images not just the burning of forests and deforestation through cattle farming, but the loss of carbon capture these trees play such a critical role for. So yes, we're releasing more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through burning of rainforests, but we're losing that carbon capture at the same time. These landfill sites, anything organic is rotting, that creates methane into the atmosphere as well. And just animal activity. There's a great book, actually. I can't remember the author of it. It's called Will Farts Destroy the Planet? And actually, it's to do. It really sort of does delve into what's happening to the planet, and sort of takes you to a kind of future scenario on how we what we produce and how that affects the climate as well. And obviously, industry and transport are creating huge impact on the amount of carbon dioxide that's going into the atmosphere. So we see a direct correlation here between the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and global temperatures. These fluctuations are really, they're seasonal fluctuations, but also fluctuations based around the El Nino and La Nina causes, which are massive amounts of water that are sort of flowing around sort of the ocean currents and creating warming effect and cooling effect. So although you do see fluctuations here, you can see a general trend up to the amount of at the moment around about 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide, which is almost 50% more than what was in around the late 19th century. So looking at consequences now, and we can see just through this chart just how many of the 10 hottest years on record globally, starting back in 2005. So we see an actually trend that is continuing to happen, and this data is really important to sort of look at and understand. So we see consequences here. We see greater droughts. We see coral bleaching as a result of warming oceans. We see sea level rises, which creates greater storm surges. We see the melting of ice caps, such as the Greenland ice cap, which is again raising sea levels and also changing the salinity of oceans. And we see also the melting permafrost and the frozen lands, in particular in Canada and Siberia, which is then releasing a lot of methane into the atmosphere as well, which is around about 23 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. And we see, these images, the bottom two are from, my part of the world in the UK, and we've seen greater flooding, more extreme weather, especially in wintertime, higher temperatures, greater heat waves. And these are predictions that scientists have said for decades now will be a result of what we're doing to the planet. We see the fires that have been sweeping across Australia and Western United States. And this little image here is the Costa Rican golden toad, one of the species that became extinct directly because of climate change and the changing rain patterns happening in the Costa Rican rainforests. And it's the human cost as well. It's the social and economic cost of climate change. The image at the top right is the little island of Tuvalu, which is sinking into the ocean. We see malaria, which is now extending into the Mediterranean regions because of higher temperatures. We see food security because of more droughts and more flooding. We see the impact on water scarcity and access to clean water, and air pollution as well, greater air pollution. So these are all human costs as well. And I think it's right then to see how climate change is affecting basic human rights. And I don't know how familiar you are with the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll sort of touch on them a little bit later on. But climate action in particular, out of the 17 goals, climate change is directly affecting our fundamental basic rights, our rights for life, health, security, food and water, housing, and self-determination, who we are as people and where we live. And I think this is a very powerful image. This is as a result of Typhoon Yolanda in the Philippines, and it's not just she's asking for food, but it's how her whole community is being destroyed. So access to housing, clean water, and safety, and who she is and where she belongs. It's just, it's summarized very powerfully in that particular image. This is an image of the droughts that happened from 2006 to 2011 in Syria, which people can say, were potential catalysts for the conflict there, because these droughts were so severe in those 5 years that people were forced to leave their lands and come into the cities, which are already stressed by influx from the Iraqi war. And it caused a lot of stress, it caused a lot of conflict, and people coming in didn't feel that they were being looked after or sort of supported, and that obviously had a knock-on effect to what we see today. This particular region of the world is affected because the higher temperatures are drawing out the land. And also the winds that come in from the Mediterranean, which tend to bring rain during the rainy season, sort of November through to April, are also less powerful, and they bring less rain. But this particular region of the world is in serious trouble due to climate change. So there's a little sort of activity for you to sort of do in the next couple of minutes or so, and I'd appreciate it if you could. On the sort of chat, just mention where you are in the world, and is it possible to order the SDGs? So, for example, is it possible to choose an SDG that's most relevant to where you live? Just to give you an example, I ran a symposium, I think it was about 3 years ago in Jordan, and I asked this to a group of students and teachers, and what came up particularly strong in Jordan was number 16, which is peace and justice and strong institutions, because of the nature of where Jordan is and how they are sort of in this conflict zone, but lots of refugees come for peace and settlement in Jordan. It made sense for them to identify that as the most relevant to them. Or is it actually possible to do that for your particular country? So maybe just just for a minute, have a think about what is the most relevant to you. I'll bring the SDGs up here. Again, I'm not too sure how familiar you are with these SDGs, but many of them are self-explanatory, and they are very interlinked anyway. So you may find that there's one particular relevant, but actually 2 or 3 are also particularly relevant to me or to my country. So I'll give you sort of about a minute just to think about that one. And if we can give some feedback at the end, it'd be really interesting to look at what people have said from different parts of the world. Like I said, I've run symposiums in 6 different countries now, and I've worked with other schools in different parts of the world as well. And it's been quite interesting when I do ask that question. Some find it very difficult to come up with an answer for that, because it's not a yes or no kind of situation. And also, it's interesting what comes out in each of those countries that hosted an event such as that. Okay, so I'll move on, but please sort of write those down, put them in the chat, and it'll be interesting to get some feedback from that particular activity. Ultimately, it's about who's responsible for climate change, and is it such a simple question to ask? We could say, well, it's down to the politicians. Surely they're running our country. But I think overall, we're all responsible in some way. I think children are the least responsible, but the most affected, and I think this is why I feel very strongly about children's rights, because they have these rights, but they're not sort of responsible for climate change, really. They're not, or they're least responsible, most affected. And I think this is why education is so critical for them to understand and do something about it. But I'd like to emphasize, though, that I've heard people say, our generation messed it up, so it's now down to you as a younger generation to sort it out. And I think that's actually quite an irresponsible comment to say, because that's just dumping the problem onto them. And I think ultimately we're all responsible to do something about it, and education plays an important role. So given the political circumstances at the moment, I think this is quite poignant as a comment from Abraham Lincoln. And you cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. And I think that's exactly what many politicians across the world have been doing. They've been looking at firm goals, their political survival, and not looking too far ahead at all. I think also this is quite a poignant little cartoon here, because the scientists, and it's not just in climate change, it's the pandemic, and it's many other things that scientists give us data on, and it's whether we take that data and actually act on what they feel is the correct thing. Science doesn't lie, but the politicians take that information and look at quite often their political survival. So it's about it's about the power of the vote, really. If people feel so strongly about climate change, for example, they're able to then vote in or vote out people who are not taking it seriously or who are taking it seriously. And I think seeing that very much play out in many parts of the world. We also have to look at responsibilities of big giant corporations. These 5 companies here have been polluting 12.5% of all industrial carbon pollution just by these 5 companies. So again, it's about the responsibility of these companies and those behind them to do something about it. I've noticed, actually, in particular in the last two years, before the pandemic happened in particular, that really the media were sort of putting climate change at the top of the agenda. Suddenly there were these climate science reports which are putting data there which was quite sort of concerning, but giving us a very short space of time to do something about it, and really sort of putting the emphasis on the now rather than thinking about sort of far ahead in time. I think also many sort of climate weather patterns were happening. Something we call Furnace Friday, for example. Places were really hot right across the globe. Global temperatures in many parts of the world were hitting record highs. So I think certainly before the pandemic hit, this was all over the media, and I think it's something that we really need to sort of keep going on as more as critically important beyond the pandemic in a way. Climate crisis is our greatest crisis. And, we have to look at our ecological footprint as well. And you notice in the UK here, we're living as if we've got 3 planets worth of resources. And going back to that selfie, clearly we don't. We've got 1 planet. And globally, we're living as if we've got 1.6 planets worth of resources. So we're not sustainable. And much of this is our footprint on the amount of energy we use in the home and the amount of food that we produce and consume. A third of all food is wasted. And this waste adds to climate change because of the amount of stuff that we're producing, the amount of stuff we're consuming, and the amount of stuff that we're wasting. This is all adding to the amount of, when we look at production, for example, the amount of carbon dioxide, etc., that's pumped into the atmosphere because of what we're producing, and also the methane that's released because of what we're wasting organically. So we all know about Greta Thunberg, and she's just been an inspiration, but I think there's many, many Greta Thunbergs out there, but I'm not even going to call them Greta Thunbergs. Everybody's an individual, and everybody can be really inspired by what she's saying. What she's done is actually she's highlighted the problems that humans have in general about climate. We call them cognitive biases. We're very much thinking about present is more important than the future. And I think that's clearly been said before. We tend to evolve to pay attention to immediate threats. And I think the pandemic was a good example of that, rather than kind of longer term, more complex threats such as climate change. She's also highlighted the lack of concern for future generations. She's also talked about the bystander effect, which is meaning that there's somebody else that will sort it out rather than ourselves. There's always going to be somebody else to sort it out. And staying the course, even though we know that the course is wrong. And also a lack of collective action. And I think she's sort of put all those together in the way she's approached climate change. And she can certainly be an inspiration to many, many people, especially her generation, that say, look, this is not good enough. We need to do something. We need to act now. This is not something in the future. This is now. So it is personal. And I always start with my starting point is I have 2 children who are both teenagers. And it's about their future. And we are all parents or we have some connection with children, whether we're aunties or grannies or granddads or whoever we are. We have a personal connection with the younger generation. So it's really our starting point to think about that and think about how their lives will be in 20, 30, 40 years' time, and take it personally. And I think the personal, again, thinking personally is, and this is again just a chance to sort of reflect on this, and you can share your thoughts online as well. Is what are your thoughts about the future? Is it positive? Is it negative? Are you hopeful? Are you sort of really sort of worried? And how is your country itself being affected? And what are its future challenges? So is it water security? Is it food security? Is it, so in the case of the Middle East, is it just basic survival in extreme temperatures? So what are the future challenges within your own country? And how will your actions make a difference? Because this is, people say quite often, oh, I'm one person, what can I do? But actually your actions do make a difference. And like Greta said about collective action, obviously it's a lot better if we work together. And this is why education is so important, because we as a school community, for example, and all the people we are, affecting within that school community can have a massive, massive knock-on effect in a positive way. Again, just put your thoughts down there and let me know what you think. So like I said, when it comes to responsibility, I think education plays a critical role. We know that from a very young age, and I've worked with 3 to 5 year olds up to 18-year-olds that really sort of get it, and quite often are not given an opportunity to understand or even voice their concerns because they don't know enough about it. And I think we're seeing a fundamental shift here into more focus on education and the really important role that sustainability education, climate change education plays beyond what the challenges are within schools anyway. But remember, it's incorporating what you're already doing and then inspiring others to take it on, rather than having one person in a particular role that just kind of, really sort of struggles to get things through to the whole school community, because that is quite a challenge. And I've put together challenges that are faced in schools, because it's not easy. It's a very, very tough role. I don't think anybody truly understands just how amazing being a teacher is, but also how sort of incredibly hard working teachers are. So I find this is one I identified before was the gaps between the awareness and understanding of climate change, is just general sort of sustainability issues, sustainable development goals, that sort of bridging that gap between awareness and really sort of delving into understanding what these issues are in the first place. Motivation to acknowledge how to be more sustainable. So from not feeling that you're alone in a situation, but actually to sort of feel like there is collective community empowerment. I think that's really important. Finding a time and a voice, so giving an opportunity. And quite often, when I go into schools and run workshops with teachers, they'll quite often say that we haven't had an opportunity to have a dedicated time to look at sustainability in general on what the school is doing. And often the discussions become really sort of vocal because they're suddenly given a voice. And I think that's within a school, that's really important. We all have sort of those CPD times, and there's obviously there's core subjects to cover, but this for me is a core subject, and I think it should be given time and a voice. Getting parents involved, I've found that schools can do amazing things, and there's lots of initiatives happening within schools, but it's that sort of, again, it's a bit of a disconnect with parents. And so when the children go back home, and for example, when they go back home and they've just been learning about how to reduce waste and recycle, etc., parents aren't on board, and they don't have the patience or understanding to listen to the children. Cultural thing as well, parents know best, and I think in this case, definitely children know better than parents when it comes to saving the planet, and I think parents should really listen. So it's getting the parents involved, and that could be through parent workshops and regular sort of meetings or sort of communications to parents about what the school is doing. Again, if you don't have a school management behind initiatives within the school, it's very difficult to get movement on it, and it does involve budgeting as well. You need to have just as you would have a subjects such as science and maths, which would have its own budget. I think the person who takes over sustainability or climate change teacher or whatever role you take on, needs to have some kind of budget that they're able to develop initiatives with. And mentioning again, creating a framework for professional development, linked to ESD, that's Education for Sustainable Development. That's really important to have that regular staff training, not just to share sort of initiatives, but also just to continue that motivation and ways for them to integrate sustainability into what they're already teaching, rather than having an add-on. And I've gone into schools where the infrastructure of the physical aspects of the school are really strong. They put in lots of initiatives to reduce energy, water, waste, etc. But it's changing that mindset. So having a school like that, absolutely, but within the school, having students, teachers, all the staff very much on board. And it is that I think probably the biggest challenge is getting the whole school community involved, and that's through big events which bring people together. It involves everybody feeling that they have a sense of purpose and responsibility as an educator, not just as a climate change teacher or a sustainability coordinator, but actually as an educator. So these last few slides are just just sort of examples of things that have worked. This first one, school participation, getting the whole school involved. This is about parents working. This is selling books and toys, sort of reselling them. So people would bring in those toys and books, and they'd resell them, so they were reused rather than just thrown away. You've got students in grade 5 here that had put the whole project together, so they were doing the sort of mathematics and all sort of counting of money and all the pricing and everything like that. It was getting everybody involved. Some of the money went to a local charity, so again, it was reaching out to local community to support them. This is linking ideas throughout the year. So yes, you could have, say, an environment month, for example, but not just have these kind of one-off events like, oh, we do, Environment Day, or we do Earth Hour or something like that. But to have these running throughout the school calendar, so it's not just seen as kind of these little pockets of activities which are not then connected very easily. So being creative, fun as well, recycling fashion shows, art exhibitions, all sorts of really interesting ideas. Getting the older children involved actually was really interesting. The girl on the right is actually modeling something that was designed and made by a fellow student of hers who was really into fashion. So that's a good way of getting the older students involved. Practical and valuable lessons and trips, getting kids out there, doing things that are relevant. Top right is a lesson I was doing on water dilemmas. So if you were forced in a situation within a school where there was no water, how would you manage that? And that sort of opens up, discussions on how water is such a precious resource and how challenges there are to not just have access to water, but access to clean water as well. Monitoring as well, so making sure that using data to collect and monitor to see what patterns are being sort of developed here. This is all about the amount of recyclable materials that are being collected at school, and seeing patterns of that, and sort of using that within maths to look at graphing and data handling in general. And then getting as many students involved in committee meetings where they are, directly involved in decision making, and they're given properly structured time to happen, not just one-off meetings that can be cancelled just because something else comes up. These are dedicated times which are really important, that students feel that their time is then valued, and being aware of what's on the eco calendar as well. These sort of images I picked up because the last symposium I ran was in Ghana. So I just picked up when I was talking to teachers here, was about things that are happening in the community and getting involved in events out there as well. And recycling, now, obviously, it's about the rethinking, the reducing, reusing, recycling. So recycling is the last sort of point in that sort of journey, if you like. And it's just really sort of seeing the connection between what we produce and what we consume, and the impact that has on the environment, not just things like plastic waste, but the fact that we are, by producing so much, we are also obviously producing a lot more carbon emissions and methane gases because of rotting materials, etc. So connecting the whole process of reducing, reusing and recycling waste to how that impacts positively on climate action, and getting everybody involved in that process. So from the start to finish process, understanding what happens to it, where does it go, what are the impacts on that collection, and not just looking at paper and plastic, but also looking at clothes, e-waste, food waste, and that kind of thing. And it's working with local NGOs as well. So using their expertise and passion to support them, not just getting them in to do presentations, but actually supporting them financially to continue with the projects that they are doing through fundraising activities. And this resulted, when I was working out in Dubai, with supporting Emirates Wildlife Society, WWF, on a Wadi Waraya project, where we'd raise money for camera traps within this Wadi area, and actually help them to look at how it was impacting on local endangered species. And also just getting kids out into the sea, using the outdoor classroom as a fantastic resource. And also, don't be scared of using quite shocking images. This is an albatross chick, and I don't know if you've seen Midway Island, or it's a documentary called Midway, which is a Midway Island, which is as far and remote as possible on this planet. But huge amounts of plastic waste has been washed up on shore, and that ends up a huge albatross colony there, and ends up these little chicks eating plastic and dying of starvation. So it's quite a shocking documentary to watch, but it's necessary. And I'd say the same with things like Plastic Oceans, the David Attenborough series. Get these students and teachers and parents to look at these and really understand what's happening to the planet. So the role of education and educators is really using the environment as a tool and making it worthwhile and motivational. By doing that, students see the bigger picture. They understand what they're learning is very relevant to the now. It's not theoretical, it's actually happening right now. And they feel then what they're learning is valuable because they can actually do something about it. And using the Sustainable Development Goals as a valuable resource, there's so much work you can do with these SDGs. But remember, there are 17 of them, but they're all interlinked. So not to see each one as one to sort of focus on, because you realize just how interlinked they are. So absolutely, these goals were put forward in 2015 to be achieved in 2030. That's really not very far off. So, really focus on these goals if you haven't already. And that's it, really. So thank you for attending this ISA webinar. I really appreciate your time, and it'd be really good to get your feedback now and any questions you may have. My website is there, so if you want to contact me directly afterwards, then please feel free to. And I look forward to sort of taking some questions.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this great presentation. I think that you covered all the aspects about sustainability, about climate change, and how we as educators, teachers, parents, and directors of schools have to especially and are critical in giving the example to students, but sometimes students and kids give the example to parents, and that is changing right now. We have people from Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Spain, Turkey, Uruguay, and we have some questions, of course. First question is from Spain, from Luis Madrid. He's a director of Agora International School, and he's asking what little gestures are fundamental that he as a director do in the everyday, the day-to-day in the school?
That's a really good question, because I think you have to start, I feel that students can be overwhelmed sometimes when we say, right, we're going to save the planet, and it just becomes too much of a sort of pressure on them, and they, it's too sort of generalized as well. So I think focusing on waste is a good starting point, and then using SDG number 12, responsible production and consumption. So looking at how school, what they produce, what they consume. I'm not just talking about food, but we're talking about plastic, paper, resources in general, energy. So to do an audit for waste, for example, how is the school sort of managing waste in general, and look at projects that students can get involved in to reduce waste. So focus particularly on the one aspect of it. So it could be plastic waste. So look at how much plastic is being used within the school, and ask the students to come up with ideas on how they can reduce that plastic. But importantly, look at the reasons why that's important. Not just saying we're going to reduce our plastic in school. Look at the impact that plastic has on the environment. Firstly, where plastic comes from. I mean, there's still many students who don't realize plastic is actually coming from oil production, and using oil as the base resource. So reducing plastic also reduces the amount of oil that needs to be extracted from the oceans or the ground. So looking at the reasons why plastic is something we need to reduce in the first place, the why and then the how, and then get the students to come up with ideas on how they can then reduce that plastic. And also look at, series like Plastic Oceans, which is a fantastic documentary that looks at the impact that plastic is having on the environment as well. So again, there's a purpose there to focus on plastic, why we need to, because of what plastic is, and the amount of energy that is needed to make plastic, where the plastic comes from, and the impact it has on the environment, not just in the oceans on animals, but actually as part of the impact of climate change. And then just small challenges that are doable and sort of manageable and in a short space of time. And then as children sort of develop those sort of activities, they'll realize that, yes, I can make a difference, and it's not that difficult. It can be done. And then they'll be more empowered to actually then look at other things they can do. And I think that would be a good starting point.
Thank you, Peter. I have another question from a student. Even though all the Sustainable Development Goals are interrelated, but he is saying, which do you consider the Sustainable Development Goal more important, or the first that you have to attack in order to attack the next one? The first in order to start, in order afterwards to interrelate them with the other ones.
It's an interesting question, because it's quite difficult to sort of say, right, I'm going to start with one in particular, and then but I mean, having said that, I do tend to focus on number 12, responsible production and consumption, because firstly, it's something that students can look at how they are managing that themselves within the school and within the home environments. And when we talk about production, it's not just it's what you buy. It's when you go shopping, it's what you buy. What is more sustainable than other things? For example, do the products I buy use palm oil, which obviously is not sustainable? It's the fish that I buy sustainably sourced. So things like that you can actually decide for yourself as a consumer, and then you can look at what you consume generally. So the energy that you use, the water that you use, and what you actually consume, what you eat. So looking at the choices you make as a consumer as well, I think it's a sort of good starting point, because you'll see that if you support, for example, fair trade products, then you're supporting smaller farmers in communities which are affected by poverty and hunger. So you already see that being a more responsible consumer has an effect on the other SDGs as well. And obviously, I've mentioned climate action. By reducing your impact, your own personal impact on the planet, by what you reduce your sort of consumption of, or your change in consumption patterns. So, for example, what you eat. Beef, not eating beef, for example, this is as an example of what some people, make choices on. That can have an effect on climate action as well. It has a positive effect on climate action, and it may not seem very big, but it can. If one person does it, then a million people can do it. So I think that's a good starting point. But I wouldn't say that everybody should just start with that one. I think it's a personal choice as well. I think if you feel, this is why I posed that question about which which SDG is most relevant to where you are from. I think it's important to focus on the one that really is impacting you the most, and sort of do something about it. But yeah, it's a good point. They're all interrelated, but you've got to start somewhere. I think also climate action. When I showed that slide about climate action and how what we're doing to the planet is affecting basic human rights, I think that's you can see that if you look at ways to reduce your impact on the climate, you can then have a positive effect on a lot of those SDGs as well, and actually support basic human rights at the same time. Human rights and sustainability are often seen as two almost different areas of education. I think that they're so completely interlinked.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, we have a webinar 2 months ago from Eco Schools, and it was about sustainable development. And I agree what you're saying is how do we consume, how many pairs of shoes do we need, what food are we eating, are we buying reusable products, are we going to supermarkets where no packages are allowed and you have to take your own reusable package, etc., etc. I think that's very interesting. And also the relation between human rights and sustainability. We are starting tomorrow a Model of United Nations, a virtual one. It's our virtual youth leadership encounter for this year that is in connection with Wyman. And I think that human rights is very important because also this pandemic is related to what we are consuming and how we consume things, animals, etc. And that's why we are in this problem right now, and I don't know what is going to happen in the future. So I think that when you speak about the extreme relation between sustainability and human rights, we are in the right direction there. I have more questions. Do you consider the phenomenon of Greta Thunberg that is more political, or it is real? It is a real demand from her, and what impact does that have on young people?
I think she came across as absolutely genuine. I think she's been politicized because what she does, she threatens the thoughts and sort of the old-fashioned ideas that the politicians have, that they can, some can kind of get away with things by promising certain things but not actually delivering. And I think she's got to flag that up now and say, you've actually been talking in these conference of parties since 1992, the first one that took place in Rio. You've sort of been talking and just been little action, very little action. And I think that's something that I think that Greta has flagged up, the fact that we don't look too far into the future, and we really should do. We should be planning towards the future rather than the short-term goals now. And I think she has been politicized because of what she's sort of brought up and the uncomfortable questions that politicians have had to sort of answer back to somehow. I think they feel a little bit threatened by her. But the idea that Greta Thunberg is an inspiration to this younger generation, because it shows what you can do as one person and what you can do as a movement. And I think she's inspiring it in that way. Danger is to rely too much on what she says rather than what other people can do. And I think what's happened is that in many countries, their own young ambassadors have come through, and I emphasize the importance of young ambassadors to really take this forward. We need the young voices out there. We shouldn't rely on one or two voices. We need thousands of voices out there to really make a difference.
I agree. I agree with you completely. Also, I have a student that is asking me that they have a committee, a sustainable committee for students at school, but when they propose things, then the management or the directors or the teachers do not like they listen to their proposals, but they do not do anything about that. So how they can impact or change the minds of the school, that they have a sustainable committee of students, just maybe to show that they are doing something, but then in the end they do not really compromise with the committee and with what students are proposing.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I can relate to that, because when I started on the Eco Schools program and at Raffles World Academy, that's exactly the question that one of the chairperson of the committee, the Eco Committee, said to me. He said, "Is this something that the senior management are actually going to listen to, or are we just sort of sitting around coming up with ideas, and actually those ideas actually never materialize?" I think it's important for management to realize just how important it is that these kids are listened to, and it's not just about listening; it's actually about actioning on these things. And I think you just have to put pressure on the school management to say, if I'm talking about these things within my eco committee, purpose has to be that something happens as a result of that, because it just becomes pointless if you're talking about ideas and that never becomes action. So I think that's something to emphasize, maybe with the teacher who runs the eco committee, to say, can we meet with the senior management and talk about these things directly? Because ultimately, we're looking at ways we can save on energy and water and waste, which ultimately, in a lot of schools and businesses, ultimately saves money. So if that's the starting point to say we can save money within the school, great, because obviously it has a positive effect on reducing energy and water and waste at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I think we are arriving to the end. It's almost 2 p.m. here in Argentina. So I wanted to thank you, and on behalf also of the ISA community, of the ISA board, and the officers. And if you want to give us some final words, just to close out this webinar, remember that this webinar is going to be uploaded and will stay there in our YouTube channel for you to check, or for you to use it for your classes, or for you to also consult it for new initiatives. And also you can contact with Peter or with me, and we can help you with anything. So Peter, thank you very much, and you have your final words. Thank you.
Thank you again for hosting me. It's been a real pleasure. I know we sort of spent the last few months sort of zooming into people and not sort of seeing people face to face. And at the end of the day, the pandemic will sort of move on, and the climate crisis will sort of come at the top of the agenda again, and even more so, I think it will, because I think we've seen what we can achieve as a human species, tackle things that challenge us and threaten us. And the climate crisis is threatening us, and we need to do so much more about it. And schools play that absolutely critical role. So I say to all educators, all students, feel empowered to do something, but don't, if it gets difficult, just keep on going, because there's nobody that can tell you that it's not the right thing to do. Absolutely nobody. And so you just have to be persistent, passionate, caring, and just have that knock-on effect, because schools all across the world, you think about how many schools there are, and how many school communities are, they can have a huge effect on the decision makers beyond the school walls, the parents who are in that community that work in different businesses and organizations that can then have a knock-on effect. So the school community is such a powerful starting point, and I really sort of say to all school communities out there, look very closely at what you're doing. Are you doing enough? Are you empowering these students to do enough? And if not, then we really need to change that. So, and